Most modelers remember their first train set. For many, it wasn't a proper scale train set. It's usually in the form of a toy made of wood, die-cast, or plastic. We've looked at a few right here before. These sets very much still exist in the modern age, but ones with potential for expandability seem to be few and far between, and expensive. In 2012, toy manufacturer Jakks Pacific saw an opportunity to corner the market with a new train toy that was both affordable and expandable. Jakks Pacific was founded in 1996, and they are best known for producing mostly licensed toys like action figures and vehicles for brands like Super Mario and various Disney properties. At the 2012 Toy Fair, Jakks Pacific unveiled their latest project, a modular railroad system called Train World, showing off various prototypes of the trains and track at the show. The debut series would come out in August of the same year, renamed Powertrains. The debut series included 2 train sets, 2 track packs, 4 locomotive packs, and 4 car packs. Dubbed Series 1, these were the springboard for the first of what would be 8 different series of the modular train system, all following the format of 4 locomotive packs with 4 car packs, all to match a corresponding theme like space, military, or racing. Occasionally, a 2-pack of cars would be released alongside a series, although they would be standalone sets without a matching locomotive. As far as size goes, they're about the same width as an HO scale locomotive, but about half the height and much shorter in length. A good size for a toy that won't take up too much space. We'll go through the releases by the date of when each tooling was released. What is shown may not be the original release of an item, so beware. Series 1 gave us the first 2 locomotives of the series. The first one shown off at the Toy Fair was this, simply called the Freight Locomotive. Very much a freelance design, this locomotive takes heavy inspiration from the second generation of Electromotive's GP series of locomotives. Freight locomotive packs always came bundled with a bay window styled caboose with opening doors at the ends. The original Freight locomotive would see at least one release every series until the line was cancelled. The second locomotive present at the Toy Fair and in Series 1 is the Bullet locomotive. Also very much freelance, it takes inspiration from many high-speed trains from around the world, notably the TGV Duplex, as it's actually supposed to be a double-decker. You'll see more of that later. Bullet locomotive packs always came with a matching unpowered dummy unit for the rear. Much like the Freight locomotive, it saw at least one release in every series until the line was canned. So let's talk rolling stock. Series 1 introduced almost all the rolling stock that the lineup had to offer from the get-go. One of the most popular cars was this flat car. These were modular cars with different attachments that depended on the theme of the set. They would carry everything from logs to cars to cranes. There's 2 additional versions of flat car, the bulkhead and the tipper. The bulkhead came in a crane set and carried items that would simply fall off a regular flat car like containers or pipes. The tipper car came bundled with a mining set and included small rocks that could be loaded, dumped, and presumably lost over time. The gondola was another car included in Series 1, but unlike the flat, it was rarely if ever given any specific cargo to haul around. It's got sides on it though, so whatever your imagination comes up with could be cargo. The 3-dome tank car was next, and while this version is completely closed off and it doesn't haul any cargo, select later versions bundled with the oil refinery set would gain a clear window on the sides that allowed for a small amount of liquid to be handled by train. Rounding off the freight cars is the boxcar, once again another car with no specific cargo. The boxcar is an opening door on only one side that allows for any cargo to be loaded and unloaded. So that's all the freight cars, but what about passenger cars? The bullet trains need something to fill the middle section. There were 2 passenger car types offered and both had a double-decker design. The first one is the dome car. I cannot think of any high-speed trains with a dome, but certainly a cool inclusion of a very cool car in the real world. The other type is a basic coach, just like the last one without the dome. They were all decorated as double-decker cars in every series, except a Christmas-themed set, which depicts it as a single-decker car. Series 2 gave us the first new addition to the locomotive roster with the subway train. It is the first and only train that we can pinpoint an exact basis in reality for. It very closely resembles the London Underground's S-Stock type train, which would have been the current stock when this was released. They are still in service for those of you that are interested. The locomotive pack came with the front car and the rear car. Fitting, it's based on a London Underground design since the introductory version in Series 2 is in this Union Jack livery. It would only ever see one more mainline release with a silver livery covered in graffiti mimicking the New York subway, before being relegated to licensed sets featuring Spider-Man and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It would never see another standalone release as a locomotive pack post-Series 3. Series 2 also released a set of matching subway cars. All 4 cars in this set are identical apart from the number on the side, and that makes sense here. They're not different from each other in real life. I'm shocked the Bullet set included a different car, if I'm being honest. I feel like these are the better passenger set, as I feel the single-decker cars fit into the system a lot better. They received the same releases as the Locomotives, so I'm not going to delve into that here. Skipping ahead to Series 4, Jack Pacific was now 2 years in and the line was still seeing success. Series 4 really shook things up for the line by offering 2 new locomotives and RC versions for both. The first one is this freelance 6-axle diesel locomotive inspired by the more contemporary diesel locomotive designs like the General Electric Evolution series. Confusingly, Jax decided that this locomotive should also be called the freight locomotive, which makes research into the various models here more difficult than it already is. Much like the earlier freight locomotive, it came bundled with the same bay window caboose with opening doors. The locomotive would see 4 main releases, along with an RC version and a set exclusive version bundled with an oil refinery set. The strangest release of this locomotive has to be this Batman-themed one included in a licensed train set. The last locomotive added to the lineup, also in Series 4, was the steam locomotive. Yes, it really took them 2 years to add a steam locomotive to the roster. It may look like it's trying to be a 410-0, but it's actually supposed to be a 484 as the fake wheels on the side show. It is the most freelance design of the whole line, and there is likely no one locomotive that it matches, or even comes close to. The main drive rod had to be geared to the rear axle to give that piston effect. It easily is the most detailed body of all the locomotives, as most of the details present here are molded on, unlike the rest which have decals, as the decals would have been too hard to apply with such a complex shaped object. Steam locomotives always came bundled with a tender, which is the shortest train car that the line ever had. This particular steam locomotive is very special to me, not because it's rare or anything, but this is mine. I've had this thing for about 10 years since Series 4 debuted. The steam locomotive would see 3 releases and a special remote control release and a Christmas set with an enlarged tender, presumably to hold the batteries and the receiver. Even with just 5 locomotives, there's a pretty nice variety of train designs throughout this entire line, but they're all really the same under the hood. Locomotives are powered by 2 AAA batteries inserted side by side into the bottom of the locomotive. Locomotives all have a fairly obvious switch. It's a black button on most of them and the smokestack on the steam locomotive. The switch toggles between the low and high speed modes. It's not reverse as I've seen some say online. Cars couple together with these knuckle couplers, and they're certainly durable looking things. I've heard of some people getting frustrated with these, although I've personally never had an issue. I can see a bit of a learning curve for those who aren't familiar with this sort of coupler. The couplers are really strong things when put together, and in case of derailment, the train will stay together. In fact, they're strong enough to support 5 cars behind a locomotive when held up in the air. Of course, these trains have their own dedicated track system, but the box does advertise that they do work in off-track play. The locomotives have chassis with wheels that are rigidly mounted to the chassis so they roll nice and straight. The strange thing here are the cars. The axles on the cars rotate as if they were on trucks. It's a very odd choice since the locomotives will take the track's curves just fine. The rotating axles remind me of the Micro Machines trains, and if you know a bit about those, you'll know how they roll off track. Not super well. Getting back on track, it comes in a couple of different basic varieties. Straight, curved, 2 different types of switches, diamond, and a stop track. There's a few specialized tracks, namely the ramp, bridges, and the railroad crossing. Tracks join together through 2 tabs and a central connector. It creates a fairly tight-feeling connection and gives the tracks real sticking power with each other. Tracks are double-sided, at least for the basic varieties, so they can connect either way. And that also includes the switches, by the way. Train toys that include track are inherently difficult to design. The curvature has to be right. It has to all line up, and of course it has to be easy to put together. And Jack Pacific has a really nice track system on their hands. It's not perfect, but it's very clear that the toy designers actually played with this thing. Tracks come in standard sizes, straight, half straight, and only 1 curve size. The switches perfectly line up with both the straight and curve, allowing for them to be seamlessly incorporated into an existing layout. Only pieces I've had issues with are the switches here, but they're clearly only designed for specific uses. The regular one is for branching off, and the other for making sidings, and the railroad crossing piece is designed to fit with this shallow switch. There's also these ramps, and they're quite special. These were bundled with a couple train sets, but what I find way cooler is this special set here. For a short time, Jax experimented with expanding the line into Power City, which would include buildable structures with these little steel beams and foundations. It allows for a custom bridge to be built in whatever manner the builder desires, which is a super cool concept and works very well with the whole creative process of building a railroad. I don't have a degree in engineering, and the instructions are long gone, so I'm not sure how this is meant to entirely fit together. The instruction sets really didn't pan out, and the line was dropped fairly quickly. These train sets came with plenty of accessories, ranging from small signs, tunnels, and trees to train stations and entire industries. The little stuff is pretty normal train set stuff, but the big stuff is where I feel this line truly shines. Most of them serve the same simple purpose. They simply load the trains. The autoloader loads cars into a rack and then puts them on the flat car. Log loader has a overhead crane that puts them onto the stakeholder attachment on a flat car. The rock crusher loads and unloads rocks from a tipper, and the crane hoists pipes and containers. The oil refiner is my personal favorite, as it allows liquid to be put into a special tank car. So few train sets actually give the trains anything to do. They're just running around with no purpose. Trains are the most fun when you're actively trying to move stuff from place to place, sort of why switching layouts are popular in the model world. So it's super nice to see industry represented in a toy here. I don't think I've ever seen that with any other train set. So earlier I said the toy designers played with this thing when I talked about the track. Layouts can fit in very small places, and tracks have a symmetry that allows for tracks to line up most of the time. Some may argue that the problem-solving skills a kid can learn is good, and I agree, but it still presents engineering challenges. It just has a lower barrier of entry that will help it appeal to the younger audience that the toy is targeted at. Trains track very well, even on curvature this tight and without weights in there. The locomotives are advertised to pull up to 8 cars, and they will manage this with ease. 3 of the 5 locomotive designs have front couplers, so you can simply increase pulling power by adding additional locomotives. Locomotives can also be towed along, although they do tend to lock up for a reason I am unsure of. There's an operational yellow light at the front of all locomotives, and that stays the same brightness regardless of what speed setting you're on. Any sets that include a sort of industry have a stop track. It should look fairly familiar to those who have played with Tomi's iconic Play-Rail toy at any point. Pull the lever, train stops. Pretty simple stuff. Good for loading and unloading at industries or stopping passenger trains at stations. It's all very fun to watch a bunch of trains weave in and out of the tunnels and industries, much like how it's fun to watch that on a real model railroad. It's very clear that the team behind this toy very much understand the appeal of model trains. Model trains allow us to create a miniature world based on our own ideas about the real world. Jax very much understood this, and they went with what I feel is a very inspired choice to depict much more modern equipment. Most train sets exist today as a sort of throwback toy with steam locomotives or maybe an early diesel with like an F unit, as those very much poke at nostalgia. Powertrains chose to debut with trains that are loose depictions of locomotives on the rails today. 4 of the 5 locomotives in all the rail cars are modern or of a transition era design. What other toy train offers a bulkhead flat car or a bay window caboose? It's not to say that this line's without flaw, though. The decor on these trains is almost entirely decals, and it's not uncommon to find them peeling off when searching for these trains on the used market. Stop tracks tend to not work at all, or always stop the train if not looked after properly. Overall, though, the flaws here are really not enough to turn off the sort of people who would buy these things or enjoy them. And even then, that stop track issue seems to be relatively uncommon. That whole modernity thing that I mentioned earlier is very much reflected in the packaging. It reflects this much more modern take on the train toy. Most Powertrains products were designed to be hung up on a store peg, much like a Hot Wheels car. The black packaging looks very smart, with the stylized red and white text adorning the box. A neat touch is the subway-styled map adorning the white behind the cars, once again fitting with the more modern aesthetic. Powertrains' popularity began to wane after the 4th series or so. Jax wouldn't introduce any new pieces after Series 4, and after 2 years and 4 more series, the line was canned. It may be canned, but it's certainly not forgotten. Bringing up Powertrains in a group of younger train enthusiasts tends to conjure up memories and a fun conversation, reminiscing on them and talking about how they were a fun intro into the world of model trains. It's not super uncommon to find these things customized to match real-world prototypes. After early 2017, the trains quickly disappeared from store shelves, but they're not gone. Around 2018 to 19, we began to see them again. The trains were successful enough to warrant them being resold by another company. The company BSQ has re-released them and markets them as Powertrain World. I am not sure if the product tooling was sold to them or if they are truly bootlegs, as they did not debut until after Powertrains had left the scene. I am not going to get into them too much. Information on them is even more scarce than it was for the original, and finding one for sale is proving to be quite a challenge as of writing. One particular set of note is that subway set. The subway set Powertrains offered was based on the London Underground S stock, and in 2021, 7 years after the subway set debuted for the Powertrains line, the London Toy Company got their hands on the tooling and now offers a London Underground branded train set with the tooling. It's very much in spirit with the original toys. The decor on the train is all decals, and the set includes cardboard buildings, much like how some Powertrain sets had. So Powertrains may be gone, but it has managed to leave a lasting impact, which is very impressive for a saturated market and for a toy that was only on shelves for a couple years. It got so many young minds into a lifelong hobby, and you can still find derivatives of the originals sold today. So that's it, right? A really good toy with many inspired choices that wasn't around for too long. Bring up the rank. Why is there a lot more runtime to this? We live in a world of remakes, reboots, and sequels. Jakks decided in 2018 to revive the Powertrains name, but these were very different from their original form. Appropriately titled Powertrains 2.0, it was a total reboot of the line, aiming to revitalize it for a new generation. The biggest change is that the trains are significantly smaller. They're only slightly bigger than N-scale now. Details seem to take center stage, with the toys now being even more reflective of real-world counterparts and utilizing much more scale proportions. They still elected to release them in waves, with each locomotive and car set following a common theme. We'll start up front with the locomotives. 2.0 made choosing locomotives very easy and gave you a choice of one. This diesel locomotive is the only locomotive the line ever offered. It is a complete dead ringer for the EMD GP40. The locomotive boasts mostly accurate proportions for all the details being molded and painted, unlike the originals, which just had decals. Main thing is the wide hoods on the front and rear, which are wider than the original to cover up the battery compartment. It's only a bit shorter than the originals as well, giving it an even more scale appearance. One thing that really caught my eye was the use of separate handrail pieces. It really helps this little locomotive stand out in a line of boring train toys. Locomotives were now only sold as a single unit and retailed for around the same price as an original 1.0 locomotive and car, although I'd argue the more premium detailing is what offsets that cost and helps it be justified. I could have done without this waste of space box, however. Locomotives are once again powered by two AAA batteries, although they are inserted vertically this time, and the on-off switch is once again located on the cab roof. Sadly, these have lost the 2-speed switch, although the yellow light at the front is still present, along with a front coupler for double heading. An RC version of the locomotive is also offered, with an attached boxcar to contain the batteries. It's a real step down compared to the original self-contained units, but at this scale, that's fine. What isn't fine is the sheer lack of control. It's one speed with no reverse. At that point, why make it an RC toy at all? 2.0 never offered a single piece of passenger equipment, although it still continues the trend from the originals and carries a fair variety of more modern-looking freight cars. The one included the basic starter set was this flat car. Based upon a more generic design for a 50-foot flat car, it is once again a modular piece. The flat cars come with a wide variety of loads and decks to match their respective themes. I have the submarine transport car pack right here, and it came with a submarine that anchors onto 2 pegs on the car. Other cargoes included boats, trucks, rockets, and shipping containers. I also have one with a permanently attached attachment to the deck here, and this one is the auto rack with room for up to 4 little cars. The rack is not removable, but the ends open and the cars can be rolled off and on, much like the original. Other non-decked cars include a crane in the construction set and a ladder and water tank in the fire set. Next up is the boxcar, based upon a 40-foot design by the AAR. Seem familiar? These are very common cars, and even most model train sets seem to include something based upon this same prototype. This time, the boxcar corrects a misstep with the originals and has realistic sliding doors on both sides. The sides are textured vertically, and it gives the car a very realistic outside braced look. The gondola also returns, and it's a flat bottom instead of a depressed center, and this one is my personal favorite of the cars. It's a generic design based upon a variety of 40-foot gondolas used throughout most of the 20th century. Just like the originals, the gondola never had a load to carry. There's also this tank car. It's also a 3-dome design like the original, and looks to be based on an ACF design. Not much to say here, just like the rest of the cars, it looks really good. The caboose is by far the most different from its original iteration, based upon a 36-foot wide vision caboose built by the International Car Company instead of the bay window that the original was based on. It's the best looking car here thanks to the really nice molded detail like the grab irons and smokestack. The separate end platform handrail and ladder are separate from the main body, and it's the most eye-catching part of these little models. Interestingly, this caboose has ladders on both ends, but no roof walk. It's very interesting since the real cabooses had both or neither, never one or the other. There's also this tipper car included in the mindset. I don't own it, but from what I can see, it looks based on the flat car once again, and it's almost identical to the original in concept and execution. The molded detail on these cars is by far and away the biggest departure from the originals. It's starting to get close to Model Train starter set levels of detail. Unlike the body, the underside of these cars is very similar to the originals. The axles still pivot for some reason, and the couplers are of a very dissimilar design to the originals, although they are more rounded and made of a smoother plastic this time. Cars continue to make a nice and robust connection, and tire trains can still be held up by the couplers. The locomotives and cars certainly have better detail, and the track has been modified to match. It's a more detailed design than the originals, with roadbed being built into the track this time around. Tracks still retain the ability to be flipped and used both ways, a wise decision. They still connect in the same way with the solid 3-point connection. Now, these tracks are smaller, so it may seem like they would have a smaller curve radius than the originals, but you would be very much wrong, as these curves are actually much larger this time around. The oversized curves make me wonder if they had bigger ambitions for other locomotives in this line. The locomotive roster was also not the only thing to receive a cut. There's only 5 track types now: straight, half straight, curve, stop track, and diamond. Yes, really. There were no switches offered here. Real step back here in my opinion. Everything is still a standard length, so it all fits together in a wide variety of layouts, but it lacks the complexity that the switches added to the experience. Trains run at about the same speed as the high speed setting on the original. These larger curves handle trains just fine, and double-heading locomotives make pulling longer trains once again a breeze. Locomotives cannot be towed along this time, however, so that's a real loss. The trains do once again have things to do, but the short-lived lifespan only allowed for 2 playsets to be released, a crane set and a mining set. That was it. The play value here is still good, but nowhere near the value that the originals brought to the table. Packaging for 2.0 also went for a more modern aesthetic, opting for a more simplistic look with a white and red aesthetic rather than the black with red text of the original. It's a very clean look, and I particularly like the renders of the locomotive and the locomotive packs. I personally think this is the better looking packaging, but it really doesn't carry the same character as the original 1.0 packaging. And that brings us to the lack of formal waves. Locomotives always got a matching car set, but it feels like they just kind of pushed a new one out at random. Only exception to this rule was the original freight car set, meant as an expansion to the starter set. They also repeated themes a lot. Most releases got a recolor with identical car choices. Seems like they had real low expectations for this line once it actually released. 2.0 is the definition of 1 step forward, 3 steps back. The trains look vastly better than their original counterparts thanks to extra molded parts and painted details, but it wasn't worth it when we lost so much of what made the original so great. Only 1 locomotive, no more passenger cars, and we lost most of the industries and the track complexity that the original captured so well. The model train spirit is still here, but it's just not the same that 1.0 brought to the table. So where does that put us here? 2.0 died off sometime in the early 2020s with hardly anybody noticing its absence. Unlike the originals, I rarely ever hear anyone talk about 2.0, and most seem to not even know that there even was a 2.0. It really has not left a mark on the train toy world anywhere close to the originals. Regardless of faults, both 2.0 and the original both managed to channel the energy of model railroading into a small plastic toy in different ways. The original hard focused on emphasizing the operational sides of railroads, and the sequel focused on giving kids a train that was quite a lot more detailed than what they would have been used to. For 2.0, I've seen many customized units that would have gotten a kid into painting their own locomotives. I bought this lot on eBay to make the 2.0 section of this video, and these two lovingly custom painted locomotives were included. They look shockingly good, and I can't imagine the satisfaction that these brought someone when they were painted. Now we're getting into the arbitrary ranking I like to do. I'm going to give 2.0 a C tier. I know I smack talked it half the time, but it's still a pretty competent train system that balances its positives and negatives to get a solid whatever from me. So how about the originals then? Well, they're certainly well remembered by the younger train enthusiasts in our community. It's one of only a handful of toy lines that took the idea of playing trains as far as it did with a complete understanding of why people like trains. It was ambitious from the very start, and they really ran with it for the first couple of years to give a new generation the joy of trains. It really deserves no less than an S tier. You earned it, King.